driver's license in order to work there. Okay, I got you. So anybody interested, here are the numbers. 347 468 4961. Again, 347 468 4961. Please call because you're interested in getting a job or you know someone who wants to work. And then you can tell them to give the call. And then we'll go from there. Remember, the ones for the parking lot attendant, you have to have a driver's license. You must have a driver's license for that. Also, let everybody, or just to remind everybody, the food is available and it is $10 a plate. Please don't let us leave with too much, and we have to start over tomorrow. So I'm saying take everything you got now so you get more for tomorrow. Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. We are beginning.
Okay. So I'm really not going to be long. I just want to pull up what I was reading from.
Get started. Finish it up. It's going to start. So please, bring it down.
I just have to pull this up and then we can go ahead. I usually don't go by. I'm trying to follow the flow of this book here. So I know we were on this last one, and then we'll wrap it. And then we'll open, I'll open up for questions after I finish this last one. But the main thing that we're saying, Bismillah, the main thing that we're getting at now, and we won't have time to address it as we're addressing it, as we want to completely. But the main issue is this is how we are to see the world and our place in it. So let me before I talk, let me make sure that I'm in. Okay. So he says, my Lord extended everything as knowledge. Everything that Allah created communicates knowledge to the mind of man, which tells us then that the world was made for man, or the world is made for the mind of man. And because of that, through this, because God created the world to communicate knowledge to the mind of man, God created the mind of man to also not just know the world, but to know him. So that was the part that we were leaving off on. Allah, highly glorified as he, created the world so that man, through it, would come to know him. Come to know God through everything that God created. There are other implications that follow from this. Because if the human being is created as an intellect to know the world and to know God through the world, etc., then this is saying that as a natural right, man is created as a natural right. Man is created to be educated. To be if the world communicates to the mind of man knowledge, therefore the mind of man is created to know. How is it that we arrive at knowledge? How is it that we come to know? The process of education. So from the perspective, what we call the Abrahamic perspective, the human being has as a right, it's his right as a creation of God to have access to or to be educated. And that right belongs to all of us equally. No one of us should be cut out of access to correct education if we so desire. But the nature of education, the nature of knowledge is such that no one person knows everything. No one person can claim to know everything. No one person can claim absolute knowledge. Knowledge by its own nature. And this goes back to what we were saying yesterday about he created, he taught Adam the names of everything. No one person can hold the knowledge of everything. All of us can have portions of it. We can make a contribution to it. We can add on to it over time. In order for that to take place, there must be freedom of exchange, the exchange of ideas. Because if I am the one that knows, and I'm telling you all that this is the case, and that's all there is, that's indoctrination. That's not education. That's just me issuing whatever I think. But real knowledge is me saying, this is what I think, and you say, well, based upon my study, I think this is missing, or this is where you went wrong, or I agree, so on and so forth. So because all people are to be educated, and no one person can know everything, because no man is God, this necessitates then the freedom of thought and exchange of ideas. Very important. This is important even in the West. I mean, again, the Western world sees itself as inheriting the way of Abraham. That's why, I mentioned this I mentioned this at our master in some classes. I even think it's a problem, even though I didn't like it at all. I didn't like President Trump's presence on social media. I didn't like it at all. I felt it was very damaging. But I didn't agree with them shutting down his Twitter account. I think it was Twitter.
Yes.
Only because of the type of precedent that would set for a society such as ours. That's a dangerous, once you start doing things like that, and they do it. They silenced Mr. Farrakhan, a lot of his followers. Because what's the standard? What's the rule? Why are you shutting this or that person down? And that's not to say they don't have a voice at all if they shut off Twitter, but if we know everybody's on these platforms, I think that's just it's dangerous for a democracy or a republic, technically. You have to just, if they talk loud like what's that was Desmond Tutu. He said his father said, don't get louder, just make your argument better. So I think that same type of logic. You have to have something where you can combat that influence. But the moment we say you can't speak, you cannot share what's on your mind, that gets dangerous. Because what happens when those people get the power to shut you down? They're gonna come back. So in a liberal society, according to this position, it has to have the freedom of exchange of thought and ideas. So this has a lot of ramifications. So we can go on and on. Education. So what we want to understand is that Abraham not only comes to the proper belief in God and the proper perception of the world, but based upon that, he also comes to the understanding of how human society should be formed based upon that belief. And human society should be composed in such a way where these are the pillars of that society, where the human being is respected as having sacred value, because the human being is an intellect created by God with moral capacity, etc. And because of that, all people should have access to education, the freedom of exchange of ideas, etc. And if ideas are to be free, if thinking is to be free, then the components that make up the society, like the government, the business, etc., they should be the product of the free thinking of the people. In other words, the leaders for society. So in the political realm, for example, who should be leading us, whoever leads us, should be the ones that we as free thinking people who can exchange ideas, we decide. It can't be someone imposed upon us. And this goes back to the comments about Malakut. I'm not, for the sake of time, I'm not going to pull it all together. Maybe the next time we'll kind of tie it. All of this ties in together. I was laying out the points, but it really took longer than I wanted to. Because if God is the true king, then this is telling us what the nature of the human kingdom should be. The human kingdom can only be legitimate if no one man dominates. But it has to be a leadership body where that leader who becomes the leader is negotiated by the free exchange of ideas. And like in Islam, we have the concept of shura, bainahum. We select. And that person has to represent the interests of the society and its pillars, etc. So these have many ramifications. But I'm giving that political point as an example of how Abraham is not just guiding us to a way of belief, like mentally, theoretically, but a way that society is to be formed based upon that belief. Is that clear? That makes sense? Okay. So, this is why then, our religion is said to be after the millah of Ibrahim. And all of these nations, these Western nations, prior to the Western world, the Muslim societies, all of them have these unique forms, you know, what we call today liberal democracy, the open market, the free markets. All of these things go back to Abraham. That's how we see it in our tradition. All of this goes back to Abraham because of what God guided him to perceive. But to sum this up, I know I erased a lot. If we had, more space, I wouldn't have. But everything that we have covered in terms of the meaning of Malakut, what the meaning of this is my Lord, I love not those that set, all the way to the end. When we take Shahada, that's what we started with. When we say, I witness that there is no God except Allah, all of this is contained in that statement. You see what I'm saying? We are witnessing that there is a God who is the king, who's the lawgiver, who evolved human society, that brought everything into existence out of non-existence. And everything that he brought into existence communicates knowledge. And that man is to be free from the burden of false worship, so on and so forth. All of that we are actually witnessing or bearing witness to when we give the Shahada. That's what the statement means. So the Shahada then becomes the basis for knowledge in Islam. It is the basis of knowledge. So it's not, so as a ritual, it's a real thing, but as a principle, it serves as the, what we would call the epistemological basis of our society and the knowledge that holds up our society. And there's more to be said. Inshallah, we'll talk about this more in the future. But when you deal with the issue of Shahada in and of itself, you're dealing with, as we said earlier, knowledge. Knowledge centers on evidence. The evidence supports this conclusion. But what does knowledge center on? What is knowledge all about? What is the subject matter of knowledge? Understanding of what?
Creation.
Itself.
Your purpose. Facts.
Facts. Facts is closer. Information and facts about what? What are you trying to derive? What are you trying to see or know?
How we perceive.
Perceive what?
Creation.
What is
Your
what about
role in it?
creation?
Turn to God.
Okay, good. Somebody said the word. You all gave it in one word. So that part, man in relation to God, is good.
Trying to understand the relationship to yourself and the material, physical material.
Okay. So when we talk about, so you all are not wrong. I'm not saying that. What you mentioned is not wrong, but I'm putting it in this order a little bit. And then we'll open up for questions on this point. Now this is a subject for another, I'm working on a book on this. Knowledge, when you say shahada, right? Shahada. This means evidence or proof. Evidence supports some type of conclusion. It centers on knowledge, right? Knowledge. We know X, Y, and Z because the evidence says A, B, C. But what knowledge is actually, what knowledge is, what is the subject of knowledge, what knowledge is aimed at is what we call haqq. What is haqq? Truth. Or reality. Evidence leads us to know what's real. So Shahada is dealing with all of this. And there are rules of evidence. Right? Like, how do you know? I saw it. I heard it. That's evidence by way of the senses. But how do we know, for example, how do we know that Bukhari made a true report? Did Bukhari see it? No. So how do we know that what's in Bukhari is true? What's the evidence supporting this hadith? So you say back to the Quran. Anything else?
Life of the Prophet.
The life of the Prophet really is from the hadith. Because the seerah is weaker, so the weaker can't substantiate the stronger. You know what I mean?
The preponderance of information.
What do you mean?
The number of sources, the number of times that fact is reported.
That's a really good one. So the Quran, the number of times this fact is reported. So you, in other words, go ahead.
It's not
Changed. Good. Where did they get that from? Where did they get changed from? Where did they get this idea about the preponderance of the report? They made it up. There's nothing that says make a change. There's nothing in the Quran that says, oh, you believe. To substantiate a hadith, make a change. There's nowhere. They came up with it. So in other words, we have to develop rules of what is correct or incorrect evidence. And it's different in different fields. Like if I'm a biologist, that's different from a historian. They have different methodologies in their field that determines how to substantiate or what serves as evidence. And real knowledge is not like just what you get like news, like information. Real knowledge is methodology. It's learning how to take evidence and properly arrange it to come at a conclusion. That's why when you get your PhD, you really have to show that you know the methodologies of this. You have to be saturated in the field, know the literature, and then based upon the research methods of that field, you come up with an addition to the knowledge. So real knowledge is what we call in our language methodology. And a big thing dealing with methodology is how we establish. Now, when it comes to evidence, so let's say we have a lot of hadith. Let's say we have a lot of reports, and these reports agree with the Quran. those reports do go back to the census. Why? Because what is a report? A report on the life of the prophet.
Someone saw her.
Someone saw her. Yeah. So you say, Imam Muhammad said, I heard him say it. You see? Then we go get the tapes, and then we get the brothers that was there. You see what I'm saying? We got this in our community. That's like a real thing. Like Imam Muhammad said this. He said, show me the tape. I want to substantiate that he said it. It's a real thing. So every field, so when we deal with Shahada, that's what we're talking about. Evidence, supporting knowledge, that leads us to reality, the truth. Now, knowledge has levels. You have what's called no, that's fine. The knowledge of, in other words, of certainty. This is certain knowledge. This is the knowledge certainty, certain knowledge. This is vision, or what we could call certain vision. And then you have ilmul yaqeen, ainul yaqeen, haqqul yaqeen. These are levels of knowledge. The first one is knowledge that is indirect, or through someone or something else. So you read it in a book, you took a class. Ayn, that's what you know directly. So this is knowledge by direct study or contact. And that's the final level. So, we're not going to talk about this too much, but I just wanted to make this point, that you have these three. It's all about truth. Knowledge of the truth. Shahada. So when we say that, when we enter into it, and we have this statement, there is an epistemological, it's epistemology. I don't have another way to put it. This centers on, Shahada centers on the subject of epistemology. The study of knowledge. What is knowledge? And how do we know what's knowledge and what's not knowledge? That's what we're dealing with. In every society, every civilization has this. Every civilization has to establish what is knowledge, what's true, what's evidence. So I'm saying this to say that the Quran gives us this. The Quran gives us rules or principles establishing or rules of epistemology, methods of establishing what's true and what's not true, so on and so forth. So we'll talk about that tomorrow, inshallah. Yes, ma'am.
Knowledge is continual, right?
Yes.
And there's not an end to knowledge.
Right.
Okay.
From our perspective, yes. We don't anticipate that we can know everything.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
And everything said in creation sends a message to the mind.
Right. Yes. Right.
What did he say?
I said that everything in creation sends a message to the mind.
Yes, ma'am.
In terms of that freedom of thought, do you think that it was that in terms of knowledge and Islamic knowledge, do you think that being Muslim made it harder or easier for those of us that came over on the ships? Did those of us who were Muslims, did that make it how do you think that worked in terms of us reconciling that condition with what we Islamically knew?
So you mean like slaves, African who were Muslim who were enslaved? How?
The context I'm asking is that I told you a couple of things from my first trip to Africa. But one of the things that the guy was telling us in terms of the need is that a lot of the Muslims that they went to capture got killed because they fought the hardest.
Yeah.
And then when they, even if they were able to transport them from the interior to the shore, a lot of the whites didn't want the ones that they knew to be Muslims.
Right.
Because they already knew it was going to be a problem, so a lot of them were killed even there.
Yes.
So I'm saying in terms of the ones that, did make the journey and come over, brought over,
Right.
how do you think that them being Muslim helped or made it more difficult for them to survive that situation?
Yeah, I think it made it more difficult because I was going to say that I read something recently where they were actually saying in some parts of the country, certain masters, it's just a thing, don't bring Muslims. They just don't make for good slaves because they were rebellious, etc. So I think that we actually see it. Someone was telling me recently, I have an associate from Haiti. He was relating how he just converted in maybe 2019. His wife has been Muslim, but he just converted recently when his mother passed. And he was saying that I forget the name, but one of the major figures in the history of Haiti who helped lead the revolution, believed to be Muslim. What is it? That's what it was. Yes. So he was relating. So I think that's what it was. But you're asking in terms of, are you related to the freedom of thinking?
Right.
Yeah. I think that's. You know what's interesting? What's his name? Yeah, Henry Louis Gates Jr. He did an interesting a couple years ago on the Black church, and one of this was like a PBS special, and he went to the church, and in one of these churches there was Arabic inscribed. He shows that, and I think that they feel that they always have to do that, the church people, because all the Black church people and the people who study African Americans, because they know. Dr. Sierra Lincoln, I have the transcript. My father-in-law gave it to me. Dr. Sierra Lincoln was telling Imam Muhammad, this was at a dialogue they were at, that there's so much research showing that the presence of Muslims from Africa. And he was saying that scholars have known and they're preparing literature on it. So, for example, when you go to the Field Museum in Chicago, which is like, people come to Chicago and go to that museum. When you go through the African exhibit, the Field Museum is like an anthropology museum, so the different parts are on different parts of the world. And when you go all through Africa, you go through this, and then it leads to the slave exhibit, the different exhibits. That's the word I was looking for. When it leads to the slave exhibit, when you walk in, it's a ship carved into the wall. They have Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim written on the ship. Like, they don't have to do that. I mean, no one asked them. They don't have to really do that. So they, like Dr. Gates did, and I appreciate that he did that. They show in these small ways this presence of Islam with our people. And there's this story after story. Imam Qasim Ahmed mentioned this. May Allah forgive him his sins. He ran in paradise. He tells this story of his uncle who would write Arabic with a twig. My father-in-law, he said his grandfather would go out into the woods and pick twigs to brush his teeth with. Just small things that are just we don't even document them. We just see, we see it. So I think that that's a very important part of our history that we just don't know. But I have read what you're saying, that freedom of thinking, they were of the position that didn't make us fit to be slaves. So, I think South Carolina and Georgia was the most concentrated area in the Americas where they brought Muslims. Brazil and then those two places. Yes, ma'am.
One I remember was, when Muhammad talking about, you know, the first ones of us who stood up and said, you know, I know what the ones who just knew, we're not getting out of this.
Right.
We're gonna pray it forward. He said, those are the ones of us that they were probably with some. They knew they couldn't do that. They couldn't fight.
Yeah.
Because we had, one of the things I had, I was with Sister Crystal, I had to oversee social studies section, and the kids were talking about, you know, black people and what happened to us, and they just didn't know what it was. The Asian guy was like, you know, black people were slaves, and then when they became human, I said, man, you don't know. We fought from Africa
Yeah.
all the way across, and the guy said, there were many insurrections.
Yeah.
It wasn't just one. And that took was a very late one.
Yeah.
We fought all over the place, and then mentioned the ones that said one of the tributes, when they went to the graves, they had one finger up.
Yeah.
Muslim, I'll show you when it was Muslim. And then God actually went so like our history is so deep, we are so rich, and all this information we're finding out just now, it's going to change this whole situation that we have here with what you're talking about knowledge and information and understanding and standards, because now, like even in biology, doctors are forced to say stuff that's so untrue. You know, that a man can be a woman, that man can be a birth. It's just crazy. Like, how do you go to medical school all these years and they retell you what a man is, what a woman is? There's no knowledge base here, so this is gonna blow up in a little bit. Not it's gonna blow up really soon because there's a group of people who just not gonna tolerate this. You know, so.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I would like you to elaborate on the word malakut and malakut.
Yeah,
And the
so,
relationship to the word in the Quran that we reference to angels.
so malaika is angels. And okay. So let me erase this part. So they all come from that root. Now, I was explaining to someone, Imam Musa and I, we had a few conversations, so he was asking again about grammar. It's important to understand we have a lot of grammar. Like we have some good grammar programs, and I do recommend people to study grammar. But you just want to know what you're getting into. So there are actually different schools of grammar. Like that. So in Islam, we say schools of thought, and everyone thinks like the schools of law. There's a school of almost everything. So even in the study of grammar, there are schools. So they will have a difference of opinion of what this word comes from. So again, the word malaika, but in its singular is malak. Malaika is plural, and singular is malak. So malak, angel. And then, like the words we said before, we have Malik, king. Then we have Malik, ruler. Then we have Mulk, kingdom. Then we have, as we said earlier, Malakut. Malakut. And this is like the law, unseen. It's really like the unseen laws, because the laws are unseen. The unseen is understood through the seen. And then, of course, the plural is malaika. Malaika. Angel. So what this really says, it says a lot. And this is why I preface what I said about these different schools of grammar. If you have lexicons, if you study grammar books, and if you think, I have a running joke with my wife. And I say it till I'm blue in the face, but it's from a movie that she likes. But I say this till I'm blue in the face. If you study that stuff, you'll have some information, but you won't necessarily know what you're talking about. That's just for real. because these are schools. So like we read, that's what I mentioned earlier. Most of us read Hafs. Like 95% of the world reads Hafs. So we'll hear somebody recite different, but oh, you're doing it wrong. That's not true. We're just used to one school. So even these Arabic books that they translate, it's just one school. But the key is all of these schools have to be substantiated by the Quran. In other words, even your grammar, you have to look at the meaning of the language of the Quran, and that's how you derive how you read. So I think I mentioned this yesterday. I'll give you an example, not to be too roundabout, but when you say allama, you ask a grammar student, especially in the West, what does this mean? They'll say, oh, that's form 2, causative, past tense. You know, it'll give you something like that. Perfect tense. The action was done and completed. He taught. Okay, if that's true, then how do you explain when he says, well, allama Adam, everything? He taught Adam everything? Is that what the grammar was saying? That the first man knew everything. He knew coding, nanotechnology, cryptocurrency. The first man knew all of that. He named all of that. So obviously then that reading of the verb is extremely limited if you're reading it grammatically. You have to read the scripture. Then the scripture tells you what the grammar is. That's what Imam Muhammad taught us. And a lot of these people who come behind Imam, they're blocking your thought process. They'll make you ignorant. So we know what the angel, the fact that the word for angels is connected to all of these meanings in the Quran, not in the Arabic language, in how Allah himself uses it. It gives us the connection. Now there are two issues. There's another word I left out. But I'll leave it out for now, that's fine.
Well, what's the last word?
This one here?
Laws.
Yeah, malakut. Yes. So, what this is basically saying is that, to kind of put it in a simple way, how you have the kingdom with the rules, and it's under the ruler, then you have those who execute, like in the West, we have like the executive branch, like the police, the military, they execute. So if the judge says, you got to pay child support, and you don't, they send the sheriff to come get you or something like that. So that's the angels play. They have a role to execute the laws in the kingdom. That's the role that they play. And different angels play different roles. We have like the angel of revelation, the angel of death, so on and so forth. So it's like, for want of a better way of putting it, these are, well, no, I won't say for better. These are like instruments through which the will of God in his kingdom is expressed. Or his will is done. You see what I'm saying? Now there's another word called mala, like mala'un, and it means chiefs. So it's given like this, I think. Mala. Like chiefs, rulers of society. And the connection here, as is given in the Quran, Pharaoh and his chiefs, the Ad and the Thamud, the people of Noah, they have their chiefs. They really take a position over society where they establish their laws under their kingdom as the rulers, and they also take this angelic role too in the history of religion. So that's what this term. So most of the time when Allah speaks of those who oppose the prophets, and their chief said, it's this word. The problem, the sort of historical problem is that just as the angels are given a role to execute the will of God, for want of a better way of putting it, the chiefs or the rulers of society put themselves in that role. This goes back to Iblis. He sees himself as an angel serving God. He sees himself as a servant of God. So he is ordering or influencing the life of man under God's authority. He sees himself just as justified to do that, but he's not. So that's the term. Okay. All right, so they told me that we don't want to eat too late. No, they already put that on their card. So that's fine. So again, we're about we're a little behind. So tomorrow we'll talk about the other things because we'll have a couple hours tomorrow, inshallah. So we pray that Allah be with us and guide us always. Thank you all, and I hope we enjoy the meal that's prepared. I ate that; those greens were good. No, those were catered. I was about to ask who cooked them, but those were catered, right? The greens, okay. What's tonight? No, this is. Assalamu alaikum. Read it. Yes, sir. You just gotta. Who is it? Oh, that's one of the ones. So that's the one.